The Elon Musk story, from bullet kid to space pioneer, a complete journey. Let's talk about a kid who was beaten so badly at school that he was hospitalized with a broken nose. A kid whose own father emotionally abused him. He taught himself to code because he had no friends to play with. That kid grew up to become the richest person on earth. His name is Elon Musk. But this is not a fairy tale. It's messier, more painful, and more human than any movie could capture. By the end of the story, I hope you will see that your current struggles might just be preparing you for something extraordinary. The beginning, Pretoria, 1971. Elon Rib Musk was born on June 28, 1971 in Pretoria, South Africa. His parents, May and Errol Musk, seemed like the perfect couple. She was a model and dietitian, he was an engineer, but when Elon was just 8 years old, their marriage fell apart. Years where most stories would gloss over the details, but the truth matters. Elon chose to live with his father, Errol. His childhood chased him and made him a lone guy. Classmates never accepted him as a friend. They bullied him relentlessly. When he was 10 years old, a group of boys beat him unconscious and threw him down a flight of stairs. He spent a week in the hospital. This accident was so cruel that he still has trouble breathing through it today. Most kids would have been crushed. Elon went home and taught himself computer programming. It could be only his rescue and friend forever for Elon. The first breakthrough aged 12, while other 12 years old were playing sports or video games, Elon was creating them. He spent months coding a space-themed called Blastar. It was not sophisticated by today's standards, just a simple shoot-'em-up game. But remember, this was 1983. Personal computers were still a novelty. When he finished the game, he didn't just play it with friends, he sold it. A computer magazine called PC and Office Technology bought the code for $500. In 1983, that moment was a fortune to anyone of 12 years old. More importantly, it was proof that his ideas had value. Years later, Elon would say this was the moment he realized he could turn these thoughts into reality and reality into money. That $500 was not just payment for a game. It was the first step before a miles to go. Escape plan, leaving Africa. By 17, Elon had had enough. South Africa in the late 1980s was still under crisis and struggle, and young men were required to serve in the military. Elon refused to participate in a system that oppressed people based on their skin color. But more than that, he knew his dreams were too big for South Africa. Now where to go? America was where impossible things became possible. But how does a 17-year-old kid with limited resources get to America? Elon found a loophole. He could claim Canadian citizenship through his mother's birth there, and Canada was a stepping stone to the United States. In 1988, with just $2,000 in his pocket and a backpack full of dreams, Elon landed in Montreal. He had no place to stay, no job, and knew virtually nothing. He could call relatives he had never met, slept on couches, and took whatever work he could find, cleaning out grain silos, chopping wood, anything that paid him. Think about that for a moment. How many of you would have the courage to leave everything you know behind at 17? To bet everything on an uncertain future in a foreign country? University years, learning to think. Elon eventually made his way to Queen's University in Ontario, then transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. While other students were figuring out their majors, Elon was earning 2 degrees simultaneously, one in physics, another in economics. Why physics? Because he wanted to understand how the universe actually worked. Why economics? Because he wanted to understand how human systems worked. Even then, he was thinking on a different scale than his peers. His college friends remember him as the guy who talked constantly about 3 things: the internet, sustainable energy, and space travel. This was the early 1990s, remember that. His friends thought he was fascinating but slightly crazy. At a party in 1994, he met Justin Wilson, a aspiring writer. She was one of the few people who didn't dismiss his wild ideas. She later wrote about their first conversation. He talked about electric cars like they were inevitable, about Mars like we would be there in 10 years. I thought he was either a genius or completely delusional. Maybe both. The first company, Jeep 2. After graduation in 1995, Elon had different plans. With his brother Kimball, he started a company called Jeep 2. The idea was simple: help newspapers get online by providing maps and business directories. Today, that sounds obvious, but in 1995, most people had never heard of the World Wide Web also. They rented a tiny office in Palo Alto and borrowed $28,000 from their father. For 4 years, Elon lived like a monk. He walked 7 days a week, often sleeping in the office. He showered at the local YMCA and lived on fast food. Justin, who was now his girlfriend, rarely saw him. The work was brutal, but it was working. Newspapers started buying their software. By 1999, Jeep 2 was successful enough that Compaq offered to buy them for $307 million. Elon's share was $22 million. At 28 years old, he was already rich. What would you do with $22 million at 28? Most people would buy a mansion, travel the world, maybe retire early. Elon immediately invested $10 million of it into his next company. PayPal and marriage, success and sacrifices. That next company was X.com, an online payment system that would eventually become PayPal. But 1999 was also when Elon married Justin. The timing says everything about his priorities. Even his wedding was scheduled around board meetings. Justin later wrote about their early marriage. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I felt like I was married to a ghost. But when he was present, he was completely present. The intensity that made him impossible to live with also made him impossible to forget. The PayPal years were a roller coaster. Elon was fired as CEO in 2000 while on his honeymoon. The board thought he was too aggressive and unfocused. It stung, but he stayed with the company as its largest shareholder. In 2002, eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion. Elon's share was $165 million. At 31, he was worth more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. He could have stopped there. His wife Justine certainly hoped he would. She wanted a normal life, kids, family, dinners, but Elon was just getting started. The impossible dreams, SpaceX and Tesla. In 2002, while other dot-com millionaires were buying yak, Elon was reading rocket science in textbooks. He founded SpaceX with the goal that sounded like science fiction: make human as multiplanetary species. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. The rocket industry was dominated by governments and massive defense contractors. What could one guy with no space experience possibly accomplish? A year later, he invested in Tesla Motors and startup, trying to build electric sports cars. Again, everyone thought he was crazy. Electric cars had been tired of for decades and always failed. GM had just killed their electric car program. Why would anyone voluntarily compete with Toyota and GM? But Elon saw something others missed. Climate change was real, oil was finite, and the technology finally existed to build electric cars that people actually wanted to drive. As for space travel, he believed humanity's survival depended on becoming multiplanetary. These weren't just business opportunities, they were missions. Meanwhile, his personal life was evolving too. In 2002, he and Justin had their first child, Nevada. For 10 weeks, Elon experienced a happiness he had never known. Then Nevada died of sudden infant death syndrome. The loss devastated both parents, but they grieved differently. It was the beginning of the end of their marriage. They had 5 more children together through IVF, twins Griffin and Xavier in 2004, then triplets Kai, Saxon, and Damien in 2006. But having children didn't fix their fundamental incompatibility. In 2008, they divorced. The year everything fell apart, 2008. If 2008 was brutal for America, it was apocalyptic for Elon Musk. The financial crisis hit just as both SpaceX and Tesla were burning through cash at terrifying rates. SpaceX had attempted 3 launches, all 3 rockets exploded. That's $100 million of Elon's own money gone. NASA was losing confidence. Tesla was even worse. They had spent 4 years trying to build their first car, the Roadster, and it was a disaster. The transmission didn't work, the carbon fiber body was cracking, and they were bleeding money on every car they built. They had 40,000 pre-orders but no way to fulfill them. The company was 8 weeks from bankruptcy, and then there was his personal life. The divorce from Justin was bitter and public. Tabloids were reporting on every argument, every custody battle. His children were caught in the middle. Some of his closest friends stopped returning his calls. Success has many friends, but failure is always lonely. By December 2008, Elon was down to his last $40 million. He had to choose, sell Tesla or save SpaceX. He could not afford both. He put every remaining dollar into both companies, knowing that if they failed, he would lose everything. He moved into the Tesla factory, sleeping on an air mattresses in a conference room, not because he couldn't afford a hotel, but because every dollar mattered. Employees would find him at 3 a.m., still working, surviving on energy drinks and determination. The fourth rocket, September 28, 2008. September 28, 2008, SpaceX's fourth rocket sat on the launch pad in the Marshall Islands. This was not just another test launch, this was do or die. If this rocket failed, SpaceX would be finished. Elon would be bankrupt, everything he had worked for would be over now. 3 failures in a row suggested something was fundamentally wrong. The rocket launched. For the first few minutes, everything looked normal. Then something extraordinary happened. It worked. The rocket reached orbit, deployed its payload, and completed its mission perfectly. If you watch the footage from that day, you can see Elon break down crying in mission control, not from joy, but from pure relief. For the first time in months, he could breathe. 2 hours later, NASA called with a $1.6 billion contract. SpaceX was saved. A few weeks later, Tesla received a last-minute investment that kept them alive. Both companies survived, but barely. 2010, rising from the ashes. The 2010s were Elon's vindication decade. Tesla launched the Model S in 2012 to rave reviews finally. An electric car that was actually better than gasoline cars. SpaceX became the first private company to send cargo to the International Space Station. Then they did something even more remarkable. They landed rockets back on Earth, making space travel reusable for the first time in history. Personally, Elon's life remained complicated. He married extra Talia Ridley in 2010, divorced her in 2012, remarried her in 2013, then divorced her again in 2016. Success in business, it turns out, doesn't guarantee success in love. He had more children, twins with executive Siobhan Gillis, 2 children with musician Grimes. Each relationship followed a similar pattern: intense connection, shared ambitions, then the inevitably conflict between Elon's work obsession and normal human needs for attention and stability. The Twitter years and recent struggles. By 2020, Tesla had become the world's most valuable car company. SpaceX was launching astronauts and building Starship, the rocket that might actually take humans to Mars. Elon was the richest person on Earth, worth over $200 billion. But Wealth didn't bring peace. In 2022, he bought Twitter for $44 billion, a decision that even his supporters questioned. The platform became a source of constant controversy, legal battles, and public criticism. His tweets moved stock markets and sometimes landed him in trouble with regulators. In interviews during this period, you can see that toll. He admits to working 100-hour weeks, taking sleeping pills, sometimes drinking wine to calm his anxiety. The man who seemed to have everything was struggling with the weight of his own ambitions. The human cost. Here's what these success stories don't tell you. Elon Musk has paid a price for his achievements that most of us can't imagine. He has been married 3 times to 2 different women and divorced each time because his work consumed everything. He has 10 children but admits he struggles to be father he wants to be. He has been hospitalized for exhaustion multiple times. He's dealt with depression and anxiety. Some of his children have publicly criticized him. His relationship with his father remains complicated and painful. In 2018 interview, he broke down crying while talking about the pressure. This past year has been the most difficult and painful year of my career. It was excruciating. When asked if it was worth it, he paused for a long time before saying, "I hope so." What this means for you? So why am I telling you the story? What does Elon Musk's journey have to do with your life as a human? First, understand that your current circumstances are not your permanent reality. Second, failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of success. Third, think bigger than yourself. Elon didn't start Tesla because he needed more money. He was already rich. He started it because he believed electric cars could help save the planet. Fourth, be prepared to sacrifice. Success demands sacrifice, and you need to decide what you are willing to give up. The question is not whether you'll face failures, rejections, and setbacks in your life. You will. Everyone does. The question is, when you face them, will you give up or will you get up? Remember, the same 24 hours that nearly destroyed Elon Musk in 2008 are available to you today. The same persistence that turned a bullied kid into a space pioneer lives inside you too. The question is, what will you do with it? As Elon himself once said, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Unless you challenge yourself towards success, there would be thousands of hindrances which would stop you from even reaching your ambition. This is where the masks come off, where risk, failures, and relentless drive collide to shape the extraordinary. If it stirs your curiosity, challenges your limits, or sparks your own fire, don't just watch, step in, be part of it. Subscribe to Real Story Time, like, comment, and share, and even join a community that learns from the bold, the brave, and the relentless. Every story here leaves a mark. Every lesson changes perspective. Every journey reminds us greatness is not given, it is earned. This is Real Story Time. Listen closely, learn deeply, and let it move you.